You are standing in a grocery store. You walk past the egg aisle every single week. You grab the same white carton, a dozen chicken eggs. You toss them in your cart without a second thought. But here is a question nobody ever asks. Why chicken? Why not the other bird? The one that has been swimming in ponds since before recorded history. The one whose eggs are bigger, richer, and, according to nutritionists, more packed with vitamins than anything sitting in that carton you just grabbed. Why don't you eat duck eggs? Most people assume the answer is obvious. Ducks are less common, farms are smaller. It's just a supply thing. But that's not quite right. The real answer goes much deeper than a supply chain. It goes into ancient human decisions about survival, about risk, about the invisible rules we wrote for ourselves thousands of years ago. Rules that still control what you put in your mouth today, without you ever knowing it. Stay until the end of this video, because the last part will completely change how you think about why you eat what you eat, and why the choices you think are yours might not be yours at all. Let's start with the obvious question first. Are duck eggs actually better for you? The short answer is yes. A duck egg is bigger than a chicken egg. Already right there you are getting more food per egg. But it is not just size. A single duck egg contains more protein than a chicken egg. More fat. More vitamin B12. More vitamin D. More iron. More selenium. More choline, which is the nutrient your brain absolutely depends on to form memories and keep your nervous system running. Duck eggs have a higher ratio of omega-3 fatty acids. Their yolks are larger and deeper orange, which signals more carotenoids, more antioxidants. Bakers who have switched to duck eggs report that cakes rise higher and fluffier because of the richer fat content in the whites. Chefs in parts of Asia and Europe describe the flavor as creamier, deeper, more satisfying. People who are sensitive to chicken eggs sometimes find they can eat duck eggs without any reaction at all, because the protein structures are slightly different. So nutritionally, by almost every single measure, the duck egg beats the chicken egg. And yet, you have never eaten one. Most people reading this have never once bought a duck egg at a grocery store, because they are not there, and that is the real mystery. Why did the world choose the chicken? To answer that, we have to go back. Way back, to a time before grocery stores, before farms as we know them, before refrigerators, before any of the food systems you take for granted. We have to go back to the moment humans first decided to domesticate birds. Imagine you are living roughly 10,000 years ago. You are somewhere in Southeast Asia, maybe the region we now call Southern China or Thailand or Vietnam. You are not a farmer yet. You are somewhere between hunter-gatherer and early settler. You have figured out that animals can be kept close. Goats, pigs, cattle, and birds. You look around at the birds near your settlement. You see jungle fowl, the ancestors of what we now call the chicken. You also see ducks. Both of these animals are available to you. Both produce eggs. Both produce meat. So why did you choose the jungle fowl? Why did civilizations across the ancient world independently in different places at different times, consistently move toward chickens instead of ducks? The answer is not nutrition, because ancient humans were not reading nutrition labels. The answer is behavior. Here is what changes everything. Chickens, specifically the red jungle fowl that was domesticated in Asia, lay eggs in a very specific way. They lay year-round. And here is the key thing. They lay consistently whether or not a male is present. A hen does not need a rooster to produce an egg. She produces eggs continuously as part of her biological cycle. You take the egg. She lays another. There is no interruption. There is no waiting period. There is no required breeding event to trigger production. She is essentially a biological egg machine running on a continuous loop. Now look at the duck. The duck is different. Ducks are seasonal layers. In their natural state, ducks lay eggs heavily during spring and early summer. This is tied to daylight hours. As days get longer, duck brains receive a hormonal signal. The pineal gland registers more light. The reproductive system activates. The duck starts laying. But as summer fades and days shorten, the duck stops. For ancient humans trying to feed a settlement through a cold winter, This was a serious problem. You could not depend on the duck. You could depend on the chicken. In the arithmetic of survival, reliability beats nutrition every time. This is the first and most powerful reason the chicken won. Not because it was healthier. Not because it tasted better. Because it was dependable. And there is something deeply human about that. We still do this. We still choose the reliable option over the optimal one. Every single day. In jobs, in relationships, in the foods we eat, we choose the thing we can count on, even when a better option exists. The chicken became the safe bet, and the duck got left behind. But that is only part of the story, because reliability was not the only thing working against the duck. The duck had another problem, a much more practical, messy, inconvenient problem: water. Ducks need water, not just to drink, every animal needs that, but to thrive, to mate, to regulate their biology, to be comfortable and calm and healthy. A stressed duck that cannot access adequate water will suffer. Its egg production will drop, its health will decline. In ancient farming terms, keeping ducks meant keeping a pond, or a river, or a lake nearby. You could not just stick ducks in a dry yard and expect them to perform. Chickens, on the other hand, need almost nothing. A small space, some grain, some dirt to scratch in. A chicken can live in a tiny coop in the middle of a city. A chicken can survive almost anywhere humans have survived. They are the most adaptable domestic bird on the planet. As human civilizations grew, and especially as cities grew, the infrastructure requirements for keeping ducks became increasingly impractical. A farmer in ancient Rome could keep dozens of chickens in a small urban plot. Keeping ducks on the same plot would have required water access that simply was not available. So the duck got pushed to the countryside, to rivers, to marshes, while the chicken came with you everywhere. Into every village, every city, every continent. The chicken followed human civilization like a shadow, and its egg became the default. But here is what is fascinating. There are places in the world where the duck egg did win, where the duck became the dominant bird. And studying those places reveals something extraordinary about how food culture actually works. Look at Vietnam. In Vietnam, duck eggs are not exotic. They are everywhere. Street food vendors sell them boiled on the side of the road. They are eaten at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner. The most famous duck egg dish in Vietnam is balut, a fertilized duck egg incubated until the embryo has partially developed, then boiled and eaten whole. For many in Western countries, this sounds terrifying. But in Vietnam, the Philippines, Cambodia, and parts of China, balut is comfort food. It is the food you ate as a child. It is what your grandmother made. It is protein-dense, warming, deeply familiar. In the Philippines, balut vendors walk the streets at night calling out their products. It is a late-night snack the way a hot dog might be in New York. The people in these regions are not strange for eating duck eggs. They made a different choice. Or more accurately, their ancestors made a different choice thousands of years ago. And that choice became culture, and culture became identity. And identity became the thing that determines what feels normal and what feels disgusting. This is the part that makes you think about your own food habits. Think about something you eat every day without thinking. Something so normal to you it barely registers as a choice. Cereal with milk, a sandwich, a bowl of rice, whatever it is for you. Now imagine someone from another culture looking at that and finding it bizarre. To them it might be. And to you, duck eggs might feel strange. But the strangeness is not in the egg. The strangeness is in the distance between your childhood and theirs. Nothing more. But let us go deeper, because there is another force that pushed duck eggs out of Western food culture. And it is more recent, the 20th century industrialization of food. This is where the story gets really interesting. In the early 1900s, most people in Europe and America who lived in rural areas kept mixed flocks, chickens and ducks together. Eggs from both animals ended up in the kitchen. Nobody thought this was unusual. Rural cookbooks from the 1800s and early 1900s occasionally referenced duck eggs in baking. They were known to produce exceptionally rich custards and exceptionally tall cakes. French patisseries prized them. So what happened? The factory farm happened. In the mid-20th century, food production shifted from small diverse farms to massive industrial operations. Everything became about efficiency at scale, and at scale, the duck simply could not compete. Chickens in industrial settings can be kept in extraordinary density. They tolerate confined conditions. They are efficient converters of grain into eggs. Their egg laying has been selectively bred over generations to be almost continuous. Modern laying hens produce up to 300 eggs per year. That is far beyond the natural capacity of any jungle fowl ancestor. Industrial breeders pushed chicken egg production to an almost absurd extreme. Ducks in the same industrial settings struggled. Their water requirements remained a problem. Their seasonal tendencies took longer to breed out. Their temperament in high-density confinement was more difficult to manage, and so the industrial food machine chose the chicken. Fully, completely, globally, and the chicken egg became the default egg, not just in Western countries, but increasingly across the world as Western food industry models spread. The duck egg did not disappear, but it got reclassified from normal food to specialty food, from everyday to exotic. And once something gets labeled exotic, something very powerful happens inside the human brain. Here is the science. Humans have a hardwired response to unfamiliar foods. It is called food neophobia. Neo, meaning new. Phobia, meaning fear. The fear of new foods. And it is not just a preference, it is a survival mechanism. Your ancestors lived in a world where eating the wrong plant or the wrong animal could kill you. Poisoning was a real and constant risk. So the brain developed a system. Trust familiar, fear unfamiliar. If you grew up eating it, it is probably safe. If you did not grow up eating it, be cautious. This system saved countless lives throughout human history. But it also locked in food habits across generations. Because if your parents never ate duck eggs, you grew up with no reference point for them. They were not on your table, they were not in your school lunch, they did not appear in the cooking shows you watched. They were nowhere in your food environment, so your brain filed them under unfamiliar. And unfamiliar for most human brains quietly becomes unwanted, without any conscious decision, without any deliberate choice. Just the slow, invisible pressure of a food environment that never included them. And this is the part that should make you stop and think, because it means that what you eat is not purely a matter of taste. It is not purely a matter of nutrition, it is a matter of exposure. And exposure is determined by geography and economics and industrial history, not by you. You never chose chicken eggs over duck eggs. You were never given the choice. The choice was made for you by industrial farming decisions made in the 1950s and 60s, by ancient farmers who needed a bird that would survive a dry winter, by water infrastructure that never reached the chicken coop, by a food industry that selected for efficiency over nutrition, and then all of that got loaded into your childhood, into the fridge your parents kept, into the breakfasts they made you, into the birthday cakes your family baked, and now it feels like a preference. But it was never really a preference, it was an inheritance. Now let us talk about the safety angle, because when people who have not eaten duck eggs before hear about them, this is often the first thing they ask. Are they safe? And the answer requires a little nuance. Duck eggs are safe to eat. That is the clear answer. Millions of people eat them every day around the world without any issue. They are cooked the same way as chicken eggs. Boiled, fried, scrambled, baked. But there are a few things worth knowing. First, because duck eggs have a thicker shell and a larger yolk with more fat, they can feel richer than you are used to. If you eat a duck egg expecting it to taste exactly like a chicken egg, you will notice a difference. It is creamier, heavier, more deeply flavored. For some people, this is immediately wonderful. For others, the richness takes getting used to. Second, duck eggs have a higher fat and cholesterol content. This is worth noting for people who are managing their cholesterol for medical reasons. For most healthy people, the nutritional trade-off is considered positive. The extra choline, the extra vitamins, the extra omega-3s. But it is not a completely free upgrade. Third, duck eggs can carry salmonella, just as chicken eggs can. The rules are the same. Cook them properly. Buy from reliable sources. The risks are not meaningfully higher than with chicken eggs when handled correctly. So the safety concerns are real but manageable. The same safety rules that apply to chicken eggs apply to duck eggs. The concern is not a reason to avoid them, it is just a reason to cook them. But here is the thing that researchers who study food culture find most interesting. The safety concern, real or imagined, is often deployed after the decision has already been made emotionally. People who are uncomfortable with duck eggs for cultural or psychological reasons will often reach for safety as the justification. I just don't trust them. You don't know where they've been. I've heard they can make you sick. None of these concerns are baseless. But they are not specifically about duck eggs. They apply equally to chicken eggs. The discomfort came first. The justification came second. And this is very human. We are rationalizing creatures. We decide with emotion and explain with logic. The feeling of unfamiliarity generates mild disgust. The brain then searches for reasons to justify that feeling, and it finds them, because it is always possible to find reasons. This is not a criticism. It is just how the human mind works. It is the same mechanism that makes people in one culture find a food disgusting that people in another culture find completely normal. The feeling comes first, the reasoning comes after, and the feeling is always rooted in childhood, in exposure, in what was and was not on the table when you were growing up. Now, here is something fascinating that few people know about. There was a period in certain parts of Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom, where duck eggs were actively discouraged, not just culturally sidelined, officially warned against. During and after World War II, food safety authorities in Britain issued guidance recommending that people be cautious with duck eggs. The concern was salmonella contamination. Ducks, which spent time in water and muddy environments, were considered higher risk than chickens for surface contamination of shells. This is a real and legitimate concern. Ducks do spend more time in environments that can contaminate eggshells. The outside of a duck egg that has been sitting near water and mud is more likely to carry surface bacteria than a chicken egg from a dry coop. This does not mean the inside of the egg is contaminated, but it does mean the handling and cooking recommendations are important. The British government's guidance was essentially, cook duck eggs fully. Do not use them in recipes that require raw or lightly cooked eggs. This is sensible advice. But what happened over the following decades is interesting. The advice got compressed in the public memory. What people remembered was not cook duck eggs thoroughly. What people remembered was duck eggs are dangerous. A nuanced safety recommendation became a cultural taboo, and the eggs towards Nutritional, which was already losing market share to industrial chicken operations, got pushed further and further to the margins. By the 1970s and 1980s in much of Britain and the United States, a whole generation had grown up in households where duck eggs simply never appeared. And for that generation, the unfamiliarity was total. Duck eggs became not just uncommon, but genuinely strange. An oddity. Something you might encounter at a farmer's market and pick up and examine curiously before putting back down. Something you might laugh about. Something that felt like it belonged to another era or another culture. And this is how food traditions die. Not with a bang, not with a decision, with a generation that never learns them. With a child who never sees the food on the table. With an absence that becomes so complete it starts to feel like it was always absence. Like duck eggs were never normal, like nobody ever ate them here. But they did, and in much of the world, they still do. Let us zoom out now, because what has happened with duck eggs is not unique to duck eggs. It is a case study in how food choices get made and unmade at a civilizational scale. It happened with organ meats in the West. In previous centuries, organ meats, liver, kidneys, heart, tripe, were staple foods. They were eaten by everyone, rich and poor, young and old, because nothing was wasted. An animal was killed, and every part was used. Organ meats are extraordinarily nutritious. Liver, for example, is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. More vitamin A than almost any other source. More B12, more iron, more folate. And yet, in modern Western food culture, liver is considered a fringe food, something older people eat, something that has a weird taste, something that many young people have never tried. The same mechanism is at work. Industrial food production favored muscle meat because it was easier to standardize, store, and sell. The organ meats got pushed aside. A generation grew up not eating them. And now the absence feels like a preference. It happened with fermented foods in certain parts of the West. Foods like kimchi, miso, kefir, deeply nutritious, probiotic-rich, were not part of mainstream Western food culture for most of the 20th century. They felt foreign, strange. And now there is a whole food movement trying to bring them back because nutrition science keeps confirming what traditional food cultures knew intuitively. These foods are extraordinarily good for you. The pattern is the same every time. Industrial convenience narrows the food supply. A generation grows up with fewer foods. The absent foods start to feel foreign. And then researchers come along decades later and point out, actually, we lost something really valuable when we stopped eating that. And the cycle of rediscovery begins. Duck eggs are currently in the early stages of that cycle in parts of the Western world. Farmers markets in the United States and United Kingdom have seen growing interest in duck eggs in recent years. Specialty food shops carry them. Chefs have been writing about them. Food bloggers who tried them for the first time report the same experience over and over. Why did nobody tell me these existed? Why have I been eating chicken eggs my whole life when this was available? That reaction is real, and it is the reaction of a person whose food environment is expanding slightly beyond what their childhood trained them to expect. It is the small shock of realizing that what felt like a preference was actually a limitation. Let us talk about one more dimension of this story, because there is an economic story here that is as powerful as the historical and biological one. Duck eggs cost more. Right now, if you can find them at a farmer's market or specialty store, duck eggs will likely cost you 2 to 3 times what chicken eggs cost per egg. This is partly a supply issue. There are far fewer commercial duck farms than chicken farms. The infrastructure for duck egg production at scale is smaller, but there is also an efficiency issue. Ducks are less efficient converters of feed to egg than modern industrial laying hens. A modern leghorn chicken hen, the breed used in most commercial egg production, can produce roughly 280 to 300 eggs per year on a carefully calibrated diet. A duck produces significantly fewer. Pekin ducks, the most common commercial breed, produce somewhere between 150 and 200 eggs per year under good conditions. That is roughly half the output. So for a producer, the math is difficult. You need more ducks, more space, more water infrastructure, more time to produce fewer eggs. The price reflects all of that. And the higher price creates a feedback loop. Because a product that is expensive and hard to find becomes a specialty product. A specialty product attracts food enthusiasts but not mainstream shoppers. Mainstream shoppers do not buy it. Demand stays low. Production stays small. Price stays high. The loop is very hard to break. Chicken eggs, by contrast, are the most cost-efficient source of high-quality protein available in most supermarkets. They are cheap because of the extraordinary scale of their production. And that scale exists because the decisions were made decades ago to build an entire industry around chickens. Those decisions made chicken eggs cheap. Cheap made them ubiquitous. Ubiquitous made them normal. Normal made them the default, and the default became invisible. You do not notice the choice anymore, you just grab the carton. The same way you grab everything else that was decided for you long before you walked into that store. But here is what is starting to shift. There is a growing movement among small farmers, nutritionists, and food culture writers to reconsider what we eat and why. To ask the question that this whole video has been circling, are the things I eat the things I would choose if I actually had a choice? Because the answer for most people, when they really examine it, is complicated. You probably eat certain foods because your parents ate them, and your parents ate them because their parents ate them. And somewhere back in that chain, 50, 100, maybe 1,000 years ago, a real choice was made. Based on survival, based on geography, based on what was available, based on what an industry decided to produce at scale, and that choice became habit, and habit became preference, and preference became identity. I'm not a person who eats duck eggs, but you were never given the chance to find out. This is what food culture researchers find when they study eating behavior across generations. That food preferences are almost never truly personal. They are almost always inherited. They are the accumulated decisions of everyone who fed you before you were old enough to choose for yourself. And then those preferences get locked in by the same psychological mechanisms that make all early habits sticky. Familiarity breeds comfort. Comfort breeds preference. Preference feels like choice, but it is not always choice. Not always. And this applies to far more than food. Your preferences in music, in design, in language, in social behavior. All of it carries the fingerprints of people and systems and histories that shaped you before you were aware you were being shaped. The duck egg is a small example, but it points to something large: the question of who is actually making your choices. Now let us look forward, because the story does not end with duck eggs being sidelined forever. In fact, the tide has been slowly turning. In the United States, small-scale duck farming has been growing. Demand from chefs, bakers, and health-conscious consumers has been slowly building the case for commercial duck egg production. Several specialty farms in the Pacific Northwest, the Northeast, and in pockets of the Midwest have expanded their duck flocks specifically to meet growing consumer interest. In the United Kingdom, a handful of farms that pivoted to duck egg production in the 2000s reported strong demand from both restaurants and individual buyers. The baking community in particular has been a driver. Pastry chefs and serious home bakers have been quietly evangelizing duck eggs for years. The professional pastry world has known about the baking advantages of duck eggs for a long time. Higher fat whites that create superior structure in cakes, richer yolks that create deeper flavor in custards and ice creams. Many high-end patisseries in France and the United Kingdom have used duck eggs when they can get them for decades. The mainstream audience is only now starting to catch up. In Asia, of course, none of this is new. China is the world's largest producer of duck eggs by far. It produces billions of duck eggs per year. The preserved egg, known in the West as the century egg, is a staple of Chinese cuisine with a history going back thousands of years. Salted duck eggs are a beloved food across China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Cambodia. In these food cultures, the duck egg never lost its place, because the industrial food transition never completely erased the traditional food knowledge. The recipes were kept, the techniques were passed down, the markets continued to stock them, and so generations grew up knowing duck eggs as completely normal food, which they are. They always were. The question is just normal where? Normal is always geography, and geography is always history. And history is what somebody decided a long time ago. Here is something worth sitting with. You have been making food choices your entire life. Every meal, every grocery trip, every restaurant order, and you probably experience those choices as yours, as expressions of your personality, your taste, your values, and in some ways they are, but they are also the end result of 10,000 years of agricultural decisions, of breeding programs designed for industrial efficiency, of marketing campaigns, of government food guides, of what your mother knew how to cook, of what the store near your house stocked, of an egg carton that never had a duck on it. All of that shaped what feels natural to you. All of that is in the background of every food choice you make. Invisible, automatic, unexamined. The chicken egg feels normal because the world was built to make it feel normal, not because it is better, just because it won. And the duck, nutritious, ancient, perfectly edible, is out there, in a pond somewhere, laying eggs that most of the people who could benefit from eating them will never try, because nobody put one on their plate when they were 7 years old, because the grocery store near them does not stock them, because the feeling of unfamiliarity arrived before curiosity had a chance to. But here is the last thing, the really important last thing. You are an adult now. You have the ability to examine the inherited assumptions that live inside your preferences. Not just about food, about everything. Every "I don't like that," and "that's not for me," and "I've never been into that." All of those statements deserve at least a moment of examination. Was this a choice? Or was this an inheritance? Is this who I am? Or is this just what I was handed? The duck egg is a tiny window into that question. A small, accessible, almost funny example of how much of what feels personal is actually just history wearing the mask of preference. You might try a duck egg someday. You might love it. You might think it tastes exactly like a chicken egg. You might decide it is not for you. But whatever you decide, at least the choice will finally be yours. That is more than most people can say about most of what is on their plate. The chicken won, but the game was rigged from the start, and you were never told there was another player.
Thanks for watching.